Hey everyone, so recently we found out that advanced Conquerors Haki is a thing, and that only the few very strongest individuals can use it. This is the ability that allows one to truly permanently damage a monster like Kaido. This is the ability that we saw Roger and Whitebeard using where their blades didn't even touch. This is what Zoro is using when he uses Ashura. A lot of things fell into place with the reveal of this ability. However, what's important to understand is the difference between this, what we just saw, and what many readers were previously referring to as Ryou. There is a difference between what Hyogoro showed Luffy back in Udon and what we are seeing now. Maybe in future chapters Oda will go more in depth on clarifying certain aspects of this new ability, and maybe I turn out to be wrong in my interpretation. But at this moment, as far as I understand, nothing has changed, and what we were told about in Udon is still simply Advanced Armament Haki, which has 2 levels. What we just saw Luffy using against Kaido is new. So before we get into that, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content every week. Now, the belief I've heard going around recently is that Advanced Armament Haki is actually just this first level that we were told about. This ability to extend the armament past your skin as a sort of invisible armor. But that this next level of actually being able to extend that Haki as a sort of offensive force was actually Advanced Conquerors Haki all along. Meaning previously we all thought that this was level 1 of Advanced Armament and this was level 2 of Advanced Armament. Both of these abilities collectively were just loosely referred to as Ryou by the community, which is actually just Wano's catch-all term for Armament Haki in general, but that's besides the point. The point is that we all thought that this was level 1 Advanced Armament and this was level 2 Advanced Armament, but now you have some people thinking that okay, so actually only this was Advanced Armament, but this other thing, this next level, was actually Advanced Conquerors, so a totally different ability. I'm saying no, based on everything we've seen so far, that probably isn't the case. The reason for the confusion is because in chapter 1010, we got this flashback of Hyogoro explaining the second level of Advanced Armament, that it can damage someone internally, and Luffy then tells Kaido that what he's been doing so far has been too shallow. A lot of people took this to mean that this is because you can't actually get to the second level of offensive flow with armament, and that it's only achievable with Conquerors Haki. And that's what Luffy meant by saying his attacks have been too shallow so far. However, that is not the case. If we look at all the results of Luffy's training of Advanced Armament Haki, it is clear that Luffy already mastered this step. That is exactly what we are shown specifically at the end of all of Luffy's training. We are shown him doing this step of second level Advanced Armament Haki, where Armament Haki can be actually used to offensively to penetrate and destroy from the inside. Luffy already had this down. It's not like he was stuck on level 1 of Advanced Armament and just couldn't get to level 2, because level 2 is actually Advanced Conquerors. Nothing we were told before has actually changed. Everything is consistent with what we were told before. There are 2 levels of Advanced Armament, and Luffy had both levels down before this fight with Kaido even started. So my understanding is that when Luffy says his attacks were too shallow before, that didn't mean that he couldn't do this effect of internal damage. Rather that this effect of internal damage is simply a lot stronger when it is done with Conquerors Haki rather than Armament Haki. What it seems like is Conquerors Haki can be used in the same way that the 2 levels of Advanced Armament Haki can, for essentially the same purposes, just on a much greater level. Basically, initially Luffy couldn't damage Kaido at all, because all he had was basic standard Armament Haki. Then Luffy did a lot of training to advance his Armament Haki to master these 2 levels, and we are clearly shown that he has mastered these 2 levels, and with that mastery he was able to start damaging Kaido. That's what Luffy has been using for the entirety of the first part of this battle, the advanced levels of Armament Haki. And what he's finally doing now against Kaido seems to be essentially swapping what he was doing before with Armament Haki for Conquerors Haki instead, which is a much more powerful effect. Now, the other point of confusion is the big deal that's being made out of the fact that Luffy is now able to damage Kaido without touching him, whereas from what we were told about Armament Haki previously, shouldn't these advanced levels mean that you can damage someone without touching them anyway, especially the second level of Advanced Armament? Therefore, if it's only now that we're getting the visual depiction of Luffy dealing damage without contact, doesn't that mean that Luffy didn't actually have the second level down yet, because the second level was actually Conquerors Haki? Again, no, because we've already been shown that Luffy does have the second level down. He could already deal damage without contact, and this was before he was able to utilize Conquerors Haki. meaning that this second level is still definitely armament haki. Remember, from everything we've been told, advanced armament, as it is, should always be able to deal damage without making physical contact. That's exactly what Luffy was talking about in Udon. That is very specifically what advanced armament is. That is exactly what Rayleigh showed him advanced armament is. That is exactly what Luffy remembers advanced armament being, and Hyogoro also confirms that this is what it is. Regardless of what level of advanced armament you're talking about, first or second, the fact is that it has always meant that there is an invisible force around you, and your physical body isn't actually what's doing the damage, the haki around you is. However, I understand readers' recent confusion that only now, in chapter 1010, for the first time is it being made a big deal that Luffy is hitting Kaido without touching him, so what gives? The reason, as I see it, is that from all of the showcases we've gotten of advanced armament haki so far, it can be seen that the invisible barrier that is implied to be there is very, very subtle, to the point that you wouldn't even realize that there is an invisible barrier if it wasn't being pointed out by characters. For example, we would never have guessed that Sentomaru didn't actually make physical contact with Luffy all the way back at Sabaody Archipelago, if Luffy didn't later on tell us that he actually got hit with an invisible barrier. Same with Marigold. The reality is that Oda isn't usually going out of his way to make it visually clear when advanced armament haki is being used, except in some really blatant instances like the three admirals making a giant invisible force field, for example. So for the most part, it can be assumed to be a very, very subtle, small barrier. So visually, advanced armament haki usually looks as though contact is being made, even when there's often actually a haki barrier there. As for this second level, again, we can assume that Luffy uses this pretty much every time he has been damaging Kaido throughout this fight so far. Luffy's already mastered this second level by the end of Act 2. Oda's just not really going out of his way to visually showcase this happening every time. It's just assumed that's what he's doing, based on the fact that he's able to damage Kaido now. The difference with advanced Conquerors Haki is that, from what we understand, it is essentially the same as advanced armament haki, just basically on steroids. It sounds like Luffy is still doing essentially the same thing as he was doing before, letting the haki flow out of him like Hyogoro said, but now he's simply doing it with Conquerors Haki instead of armament haki. And so because it seems to simply be a far more powerful, far more potent version of what you can do with advanced armament haki, that's what produces a significantly more pronounced visual effect where Luffy is clearly not touching Kaido at all. That's the difference. That invisible haki flow was always a thing when Luffy was hitting Kaido throughout this fight, letting the haki flow out into Kaido. Every single explanation of advanced armament haki tells us that's what he's been doing. Everything Luffy has shown us before this fight tells us that that's what he's been doing. The only difference with advanced Conquerors is that now that flow of haki is so huge that it's actually blatantly, visibly clear that no contact is being made. So basically a lot of confusion comes to how Oda draws things and when he chooses to make things visually clear. As I understand it, in the past, when this first level of advanced armament has been used to make invisible barriers, that barrier has usually been more subtle, so we can't really see for sure when it's being used. And when Luffy's using the second level of advanced armament, it can kind of just be assumed the haki is flowing into Kaido, and that's what's causing Kaido to be damaged now, when he wasn't being damaged in Act 1. And lastly, with Advanced Conquerors, that flow of haki is just so big that we now finally get a really blatant display of no contact punches. So hopefully that distinguishes Ryou, our fan term for the advanced levels of armament haki, from Advanced Conquerors Haki. Because you have to understand, with what some people are saying that, Ryou has actually been Advanced Conquerors Haki this entire time, if that's the case, then that would mean that, Sentomaru, Marigold, Hyogoro, and every single scabbard are all Conquerors Haki users, which makes no sense. It would basically double the number of Conquerors Haki users in the series, and it would mean that they can all somehow use Advanced Conquerors Haki. So let's backtrack a little bit here. As far as we know, Advanced Armament Haki, it's still its own thing. It can already deal damage without creating contact. It just doesn't seem to produce the same extremely blatant visual effect as Advanced Conquerors Haki does. And no, the ability to damage from the inside with Haki isn't Advanced Conquerors on its own either. That can also be done with the second level of Advanced Armament Haki already, as seen by Luffy, and really even showcased by Sabo and Lucci earlier in the series, and they are not Conquerors Haki users. All we learn from chapter 1010 is that Advanced Conquerors Haki is basically the same effects we've been seeing with Advanced Armament Haki, just amped up. At the moment, the only confirmed users of Advanced Conquerors Haki are Luffy, Roger, Whitebeard, Kaido, Oden, and Zoro. Luffy, Roger, and Whitebeard, because we saw them blatantly use it, we know that's what's happening with them. Kaido we know because Thunder Bagua was confirmed to be advanced Conquerors Haki use. Oden and Zoro are practically confirmed users, as the implication is that you can only severely damage Kaido with advanced Conquerors Haki. That's why the Scabbard's attacks were, quote, too shallow. That's why Luffy's attacks were too shallow until he started using Conquerors. That's why Zoro couldn't scar Kaido at first with a normal Ryou attack, but was able to once he used Conquerors Haki. Basically, to actually significantly damage Kaido and leave a scar seems to require advanced Conquerors Haki. Keep in mind, it's only advanced Conquerors Haki users who can severely damage Kaido, not just being a Conquerors Haki user, because we were shown that Kid can't damage Kaido yet. So if we define advanced Conquerors Haki as being able to use Conquerors Haki offensively, letting it flow out of you offensively similar to advanced armament Haki, then the entire point of this last chapter, 1010, was to establish that only advanced Conquerors Haki users can deal significant damage to Kaido. And that point of significant damage to Kaido actually brings one final loose thread to a close, which was that all 9 Scabbards were able to damage Kaido fairly easily earlier in the battle, which had a lot of readers upset that a bunch of, side characters were able to harm the seemingly invincible monster who had only ever taken 1 scar. A lot of people felt that the build-up around Kaido as this unkillable monster was, falling somewhat flat if it turned out that just anyone with advanced armament Haki can damage him, and on top of that, all 9 Scabbards have advanced armament Haki, so it seems like advanced armament isn't even that rare, basically making it seem as though harming or even killing Kaido wasn't that big of a deal after all. It even had a lot of readers calling into question, like, come on, how does Kaido only have 1 scar then? So Kaido hasn't run into some strong advanced armament Haki users? Like, if the Scabbards could do this to him, then what about some admirals? Like, how has he not been getting more scars? Why is he considered unkillable? However, Kaido pointed out that even all their combined attacks were too shallow. Their attacks are not going to leave a scar. And it took a little bit to get the explanation, but as it turns out, that's not simply because the Scabbards were too weak, but because advanced armament Haki alone isn't going to cut it. Ryou is good enough to damage Kaido, but to actually genuinely severely injure him, it takes that next level of advanced Conquerors Haki, and that is something only a very few individuals in the world can likely do. That's the reason Zoro was finally able to land an attack that would leave a scar, whereas all the combined attacks of multiple advanced armament users couldn't. And so suddenly, that unkillable myth around Kaido kind of makes sense again, as yes, in the entire world, there are probably only a handful of people that could actually seriously injure or kill Kaido. There are probably plenty of advanced armament users that can hurt Kaido a bit, but there's a reason that he only has 1 scar on his body after all these years and all these battles, because you need a very specific type of Haki mastery to be able to deal real damage to him. So all that being said, let's recap our new understanding of Haki. We have the 3 basic types of Observation, Armament, and Conquerors. Observation involves being able to read your opponent and sense presences, and some advanced users seem to be literally seeing the future and hearing voices from long distances, and finally, possibly, though it is speculation, possibly even having the voice of all things as an extension of being able to hear voices. I'll put that there for fun. Then with armament, we have the black coating. You could say another branch is black coating of a weapon, and then permanent black coating of a weapon, but mainly the next levels are the invisible barrier and then offensive force, both of which have been dubbed by fans as Ryou. And then finally you have advanced conquerors, which as far as we can tell, basically functions like amped up Ryou. Similar effects, but on a much more powerful scale. It remains to be seen if manifesting it in a special form like Ashura warrants being called its own branch, but it ultimately has the same effect, which is using Conquerors Haki offensively in a way that can damage even nearly invincible individuals like Kaido. So that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe. And you can support me on Patreon for extended thoughts on this and all future topics.